Okay, let's look a little bit at policy, because that really is your major responsibility. It's the major business of the school advisory board, should be focused on developing policy. This would include reviewing your existing policies, updating any policies that you have currently, updating policies as needed, and then formulating new ones. What is a policy? It is a statement which gives directions for the administrative action. It sets an end to be achieved. Where do we want to be? Not how we get there, but where do we want to be? A policy answers the question, what does the board want to see happen? What? So let's give and I've had this experience where you begin accepting in some schools a number of non-Catholic students. And so the school board should have formulated a policy, which it recommends to the pastor, that gives direction to the principal on integrating either children of other religions or non-Catholics of any kind. And this would be an example of a policy statement. All students in the school shall receive instruction in the Catholic religion, whether they are Catholic or non-Catholic. That's probably a common policy in many of your schools. So everyone participates in taking religion class, going to Mass, etc., etc. Participates fully in that. Now, an example. So if that's a policy that the school board has established and the pastor has accepted, then the principal takes that policy and applies it. The board doesn't apply it. The board does not say each child has religion 3 times a week. You see the difference? They answer the question, what? The answer to the question, what, is everyone attends religion classes. So the rule the principal may create is students in the primary grades will receive religious instruction for 30 minutes each day. That might be a way he or she would apply it, etc. Or another administrative rule would be the X religion series will be used in our school. So the principal takes the policy and then applies it. Okay, another example. And this really happened in a school I won't name, where I was principal in an unnamed diocese. In the spring of the year, our 8th graders always went on an extended field day. And it would start with the school day, but end often late in the evening. So our 8th graders were on such a field day trip, and many of the parents attended with the students. And on their way home, they stopped for a meal. And all of the parents decided to consume alcohol before or after dinner during that meal. They were chaperones, okay? The teacher involved became very concerned about her ability to chaperone the number of students because she was aware that any amount of alcohol impairs judgment. So she has 30-some kids, maybe 8 to 10 parents, all of whom had consumed some alcohol. Well, luckily they made it home okay. But after the trip, she approached me asking if there was a policy regarding the use of alcohol by adults in the presence of children. I immediately went to our handbook, and there was no policy. So I was in a bit of a corner as well. So what happened next was, because it was a policy matter, I took it to the school advisory board. And in order to provide the background for the board so that they could recognize the need for a policy, I asked the board to go in executive session. We'll talk more about what executive session means, but it was very key in this situation because I had to say the 8th graders were on a trip. We only had one 8th grade. If I would have not have gone into executive session, I could not have said much of the details because everyone knew everyone in that town, and I didn't want it recorded in the minutes. Therefore, the executive session gave me the liberty to say the 8th graders were on a trip, 8 of the 8 chaperones consumed alcohol, and we have no policy, other than common sense, of course, that would give me direction on how to take care of this situation. So that, as I said, the executive session provided the forum and the confidentiality I needed to deal with the situation. So after I gave the details, we went out of executive session and went into regular session, because then we could begin to work on a policy. So the policy they formulated after some research and thinking and praying about it was that no alcohol may be present or consumed at events whose primary focus is intended for children. For example, field trips, school carnivals, school picnics, school-sponsored athletic events. Alcohol could be served at the parish picnic. Why? Because the primary focus was not children. But if the primary focus of the gathering is children, alcohol is not to be consumed. So that policy then gave me the freedom, when we created a field trip, or a field trip was being planned, to put in place some kind of procedure that would ensure that the parents were aware they could not consume alcohol, and there would be consequences if they did. You see how that policy, and if I hadn't gone to the school board, then I could have probably done something, but it was best, that's the role of the school board, to develop the policy, and they did a great job with it. So to determine if a policy is a statement or rule, the board should ask itself the question, does the statement leave room for discretionary action on the part of the principal or the administrator? If the answer is yes, it is a policy. If no, it is a rule. Let's go back to that policy of no alcohol being consumed when children are the focus. That was a well-stated policy. If it had gone further and said, and there have to be forms of consent, you know, all the implementation that was left to me as the principal was not the prerogative of the board. This board has to name, what do we want to see have happen? We want gatherings for children to be alcohol-free. That's the what. Then as principal, I determine how to make that happen. It's very important you give the principal wiggle room to do that. Otherwise, you step into micromanaging the school. So the determination of the means is an administrative role, and the administrative rules answer the questions who, when, and how. What is the school board? All those other questions need to be answered by the school administration, probably always in dialogue with the pastor. So what are the sources of these policies? The primary condition leading to the policy statement is a problem in the operation of the school. I had a problem. 8 parents came home having consumed alcohol when they were to be chaperones. That's a problem. And so I took the problem to the school board because I could find no direction within the policy handbook of the school. Now, the principal, in presenting the problem to the board, recommends the options deemed most appropriate to cover the situation. She recommends, or he recommends, because that helps. You know, like in that situation, you know, maybe some of the members of the board were not aware of the gravity of the situation. You know, what's the problem? You're out on a bus. They aren't driving. You know, that kind of thing. And so you have to help the board members understand why this is a dilemma so that they can make a good decision and recommendation to the pastor. The board then discusses the matter and develops an appropriate policy statement. For the most part, policy making is a reflective process involving analysis of present conditions, past policies, and new alternatives. It's reflective because every parish has its own culture. Every parish has its own culture. The board does not merely adopt the policy recommended necessarily by the principal, but reflects the thinking of the community in discerning the appropriate policy decision. So the policy has to come from among for the well-being of the school. It's further augmented by the pastor who, from his position as representative of the church and as pastoral leader, adds another dimension to the dialogue. That dialogue was enhanced by the pastor who had been in the parish for 25 years. And he knew the attitude toward alcohol in the parish, which added to the dilemma. To be perfectly honest with you, it added to the dilemma. But with his wisdom and experience, you know, he was able to also give great guidance to the school advisory board, because it wasn't a popular policy by any means. Okay, other sources of policy, the policy and regulations for the schools of the Diocese of Jefferson City. You'll know that big policy handbook, which I'm sure your principal will have at your board meetings. They are disseminated through our Catholic school office, and they require, excuse me, they may require no action on the part of the local school advisory board. They may not. However, let's take the example of policy 6225, which talks about class size. It says, that policy says that our class size is a maximum of 30. That's a policy for the Diocese of Jefferson City. So the local school does not have the liberty to put 35 kids in a classroom, or 40. But it does have the liberty to say, in our situation, the local board creates a policy that no class size will exceed 25. That's a local decision. So you can't ignore the policy, but you can take it and apply it. And many of those policies in there would give the local parish some wiggle room. Other sources of policy would be external sources, and these usually have to do with federal or state laws affecting educational opportunities for special assistance. That's not so common, or not as common in the state of Missouri as it is in Illinois. But in our case here, there might be federal and state rules that regulate, let's say, school lunch programs or some title programs. So that would be another source of policy where the local school advisory board would take that federal or state policy and then look at it in its own situation. So how do you go about establishing policy? There are basically 3 steps. It's the role of the board to formulate the particular policy. Secondly, it's the responsibility of the pastor to enact it, and it's implemented by the local principal. All policies in your local school policy handbook should be dated and signed by the pastor before the policy becomes effective. And, of course, as the principals would know, these are published in your local school or parent handbook each year.